Hello everyone and welcome to .NET Core Central. Today I'm going to talk about authentication handler in ASP.NET Core, and I'm going to use JWT, which is JSON Web Token, for the authentication purpose. Now what is authentication? So authentication is the process that helps identify who the user is. On the other hand, authorization is the process of determining what user can do. For authorization to work, the user will be authenticated first because the identity of the user is needed to identify what the role of a particular user. And for authentication, we are going to have an authenticate method which will be called by the end user. They will pass the user ID and password in this case, and based on the user ID password we'll validate if the user is indeed have access to the application, and if they have access then we will send an authentication token back. And why do we need to send an authentication token back? Because we don't want the user to send user ID password as a part of every single call. We essentially want to create a token, set a lifetime for the token, and next call onwards we just expect the token to come back and then decrypt the token to understand if the token is still valid, and based on that we allow them access to the application. And for the token purpose we are going to use JWT or JSON Web Token. JWT is a JSON based access token created for claims. It is a self-contained and compact standard for access token to securely transfer claims. Now for the tokens, it is usually encrypted through some hash algorithm. For our purpose we are going to use HS256, but there are other algorithms which are also available. If you need more information about JWT, you can go to my blog, the link for which I'll give below in the description. Now to start the process, let's first create ASP.NET Core web application, and I'm going to name it as auth.demo. I'm going to select Web API ASP.NET Core 3.0, and I'm going to make it Docker enabled. Once the project is created, I'm going to get rid of the auto-generated scaffolded classes. Once the auto-generated classes are removed, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new controller, and I'm going to do a API controller with read-write, and I'm going to name it as a name controller, and let's say that this is going to return the name of different states. Let's add the class. Inside of the class, I'm going to get rid of the default post method, post, put, and delete, because I'm not going to use those. And here I'm going to create a new method for authentication. So I'm going to say public IActionResult, and I'm going to name this method as authenticate. And this is going to be an HTTP post method. And it will have authenticate as the endpoint. So it will be /API/name/authenticate. That will be the post. And for now, I'm just going to return OK. Now we want to expect a username and password, so we'll say from body, and we can name this model as usercred. And we'll generate a new class for usercred. Okay, let's keep it at here for the time being. The next thing we have to do is, now that we have set this up, we have to enable authentication. And for authentication, we have to go to startup.cs, and here where we have use authorization, we also have to say, okay, we have to also use authentication. So now we are hooking up the middleware for authentication, and then once this is done, what we have to do is now we have to start implementing the authentication code. So for the authentication code we need two things. First thing is we would need a class which will be responsible for identifying the user ID password against some sort of data store, and if the user ID password matches, it is going to create a JWT token. So first what we are going to do is we are going to create this authentication manager. We're going to call it as JWT Authentication Manager. So for that, first I'm going to create an interface, and I'm going to name it as IJWT Authentication Manager. And this interface will have a method authenticate, which will take a string user ID and a string password. And it's going to return a string back, which is nothing but the JWT token created. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class, JWT Authentication Manager. And this class will derive from JWT Authentication Manager. And here is what we are going to implement the logic of validation. But for this to work, I'm going to add the authentication NuGet package. So I'll go into manage NuGet package. I'm going to add Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication. And I'm going to install it. Okay, now in this authentication manager, for the username password validation, I'm just going to create private dictionary which will keep a list of user ID password. In a real life example, this will come from some sort of data store, but for this one I'll just keep it in memory so that I don't have to create another database table and things like that. So I'll just go ahead and say private Okay, so I have 2 user, test1, test2, and 2 password. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the user ID password passed is not available in the dictionary. I'm just going to return null, so no token basically created. Users.any goes to user.key equal to username and user dot value is equal to password, and if none of them matches this condition, then I'm just going to return null. But if the condition matched, that means both user ID and password passed matches to one of the user ID password combo, in that case I'm going to create the JWT token. So for JWT token, what I have to do is first I have to create a security token handler. So I'm going to say token handler equal to new of JWT security token handler. I have to install the system.identityModel.jwt. So I'm just going to go ahead and install it. So once I created the JWT security token handler, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a key, because as I mentioned earlier that once we create a token, we want to make sure that it is encrypted, and for encryption we need a private key. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a constructor and expect the key to be passed on. So I'll expect the key in the constructor, and then I'll have token key is equal to, I'm going to get the byte array from it. So Once I get the byte array of the token key, it's time to create the token descriptor. So I'll declare and here I'm going to specify the subject to be a new claim identity. So here I'm essentially saying that the claim type is based on name, and name is nothing but the username passed. This is the identifier for the claim. And then I'm going to set the expiration, and for the expiration I'm going to say it will expire after an hour. And then last but not the least is to provide the signing credential, and this is where the private key that we have will come in handy. So and this is where we are going to declare the algorithm. And as I said, the algorithm I will use as HS256. So I can say security algorithm dot SHA-256 signature. So that's what I'm going to say as my signing credential. So after I declare the token descriptor with the claim, the expiry, as well as signing credential, now it's time to get the token. So we'll say so this one will give us back the security token, and then what we are going to do is we are going to say token handler dot write token, and we are going to pass the security token that we get, and this one is going to return the string JWT token back to the caller. So just to reiterate, first we create a token handler, and then we create the actual security token descriptor where we define the identity claim, and we say claim is of type name, and we pass the username. We set the expiry, and here is how we sign the token. And for signing the token, apart from the algorithm, we are passing a key. Key is nothing but a byte array of the string key that we have expected in constructor, which we are going to set in the startup when we add this class to the dependency injection container. Again, I want to reiterate that I am keeping the user ID password in a read-only variable, but this is ideally will be coming from data store. So now once this is created, the next thing for us to do is go to the name controller and create a constructor, and in the constructor expect the JWT Authentication Manager, and then use this JWT Authentication Manager in the authenticate method, and now use the user cred dot username and user cred dot password. Now these two properties are not defined inside of user credential class. I just created them, so now I'll have both username and password here. So just get rid of the internal. Okay, so I have this set up now. Now from here I'll get a token. So now at this point, essentially, if the token is not null, I want to send an OK with the token. Whereas if token is null, that means the user is not authenticated, in which case I want to send a 401. That'll be essentially the logic. So I'll say and I'll say if token is null, then return unauthorized. So that's my authentication method. Now, though I have authentication defined here, but nothing is going to happen because in the middleware here, I just said use authentication, but I have not done anything essentially. So if I run this, I mean, I have just said, yeah, I have somewhere, okay, I am missing semicolon here. So when I run this, and if I try to get the name, it will still work because, you know, let me first change it. Okay, IApplicationBuilder Manager is needed, so let me just go back and in the startup at least add that. So let's have services dot add singleton JWT Authentication Manager, and the Authentication Manager is expecting the token to be passed, so I'll have to configure it as such. And let's define a key here. I'm going to keep a very simple private key, but in real life this will be some complex key here. So this should at least make the service not fail. So you can see we are getting the name and value without even passing a token as such in the header. So now what we'll do is I'll go back here and now I will configure the actual JWT pipeline. So for that I'm going to use the AddAuthentication extension method on the services or the IServiceCollection instance. So I'll say services.addAuthentication, and now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide the default authentication scheme and the default challenge scheme both as JWT defaults. So I'll say x.default authentication scheme equal to, I'm going to say JWT bearer defaults dot, I need to install ASP.NET Core authentication JWT bearer. So let me go and install it. I'm using 3.0 of .NET Core, so hence I have to install the 3.0 version of this NuGet package. Now once the installation is done, I can go ahead and add the namespace. And then here I can say default authentication scheme as JWT bearer defaults authentication scheme. And similarly, I can say default challenge scheme equal to .authentication scheme in both cases. So once I'm done with this, the next thing is to add JWT bearer. So this extension method is going to now help me add the JWT bearer. It's essentially implemented in the packages I installed itself, so I don't have to code for it. And here I'm going to say require HTTPS metadata. I'm going to just set it as false. And I'm going to keep the safe token. And then finally, for the token validation parameter, this is the place where I'm going to say, while you validate the token, you will be using the key that I have defined here, because this is the same key which is used by Authentication Manager to create the token. While creating the token itself, this key is used, which means while the token is decrypted by this JWT bearer handler, should use the same key. So I'll say x dot token validation parameters equal to new of token validation parameter. Let me just add it here, and then I'm going to say here I'm going to say validate issuer signing key. That has to be true because we want to validate the key, and then the issuer signing key is equal to just like what we did here. So we'll have the same class here, and we can just copy paste this part of the code. And we can pass the same key here. And validate issuer is going to be false. And then finally we'll say that validating the audience also is false. Okay, once we do that, we have configured the handler. So here we are not writing a custom handler for handling the JWT token when a request comes in. Basically, we are not going to do our own decryption and figure out whether the value is there or not. We're just using the NuGet packages we installed here, which is the ASP.NET Core Authentication Bearer, JWT Bearer, that is going to do the work for us. So internally, this is the one which has the implementation of using the same signing key to decrypt and ensure that the user is indeed authenticated. So now if we also, the other thing we have to do is we have to add the authorization attribute. And also we'll have to ensure that the authenticate method is allowed anonymous access. Otherwise, no one can even call this method. Keep some better names here. As I say, this is going to return the name of the states. Let's at least keep two of the names. So let's try this out now. So now if I go to Postman and make the same call through Postman, I can see I'm getting 401 unauthorized because that's what I'm sending back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a post with a username and password, and then I'll get a JWT token, and then when I call with the same JWT token, I should get the response back properly. So I'm going to make a /name /authenticate, and I'm going to have a post call, and then here in the body I'm going to pass the username and password. Let me also set that content type. Application JSON, and now I'm going to pass, first I'm going to pass a username password which is invalid so that I get 401 just to show, and then I'll pass an appropriate one. So first I'll say username is this and password is also this, and you can see I'm getting unauthorized. But if I send password as password 1, now I get the JWT token back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this token, go here, and here in the header I'm going to add the authorization attribute. and say pass the bearer token and make a call. And now you can see I'm getting the breakpoint. I'll just do continue and I can see the result coming back. So you can see how we can use JWT token, and this token is going to be valid for an hour. So it's a simple example of how to use JWT token for authentication purpose. So you use username, password. Using Authentication Manager, I'm creating a JWT token using the API provided by the JWT NuGet package. And then in the startup.cs, I'm just configuring the JWT token handler to handle the request for me. And everything is done by the NuGet package. So it's pretty straightforward. In the next video, I'm going to show how to use a custom handler to create our own authentication token. And this authentication token can be our own encrypted token, and we can use our logic to decrypt and ensure that the coming token is valid, and based on that we can take some action. So this is all I had to cover for today. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you think I'm providing value, please subscribe to my channel. And if you have any suggestions for me improving the video and the quality of content, please leave me a comment below and I'll be more than happy to incorporate those. Thank you so much.